엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
Coming up on Arirang News, South Korean President Yoon meets UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres and shares his thoughts on global security, suggesting continued cooperation with the UN to contain North Korea's future provocations. The Asian Development Bank maintains its growth forecast for South Korea this year at 1.3%, slightly lower than that of the OECD. This while slightly upping its forecast for the global economy on the back of stronger than expected recoveries in countries such as the US and Japan. A special conference on global infrastructure deals is held in Seoul, where South Korea agrees with Poland and Ukraine to cooperate not only on rebuilding Ukraine, but also on the European construction market. Good evening. It's 9 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. Over in New York, South Korean President Yoon has a meeting with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, during which they agreed to closely cooperate in containing North Korea's provocations. President Yoon's UN keynote speech in the coming hours will also likely focus on the illegality of potential military cooperation between Pyongyang and Moscow, as well as reducing global disparity. In the meantime, President Yoon has been awarded for his efforts in renewing ties with Tokyo. Our Oh Soo-young follows this report as she travels with the president.
President Yoon has been awarded for his leadership in mending relations with Japan and boosting trilateral cooperation with the United States. The John F. Kennedy Foundation on Tuesday named the South Korean leader and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida as special recipients of the International Profile in Courage Award for working to improve bilateral ties despite domestic opposition arising from historical issues. In particular, the foundation said President Yoon began working towards rapprochement with Japan shortly after his election in March last year, noting that the two leaders have since built a strong personal relationship, as well as engaging in an exchange of visits between Seoul and Tokyo not seen in 12 years. Such courage to choose a more hopeful future has led to a historic level of trilateral cooperation between the US and two of its most important democratic allies at their Camp David summit last month, according to the foundation, which will hold an award ceremony next month. President Yoon, writing on social media, said he was honored to receive the award and said trilateral ties will contribute to promoting freedom, peace and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific and beyond. Previous recipients of the Courage Award include Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky last year, Presidents Barack Obama and George W. Bush, and former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan. Ahead of his address to the General Assembly, Yoon held a one-on-one meeting with the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, where the leaders reportedly discussed cooperation between the two sides to address North Korea's nuclear program and the war in Ukraine, among other global issues. Yoon's address on Wednesday local time will touch upon similar issues, laying out South Korea's plan to reduce global disparities in development, climate and technology.
The President will explain how countries with financial resources and technological capabilities would play a responsible role in bridging the development gap by actively expanding official development assistance to improve the living environment of people in developing countries, provide infrastructure support, and close the climate gap. He will introduce specific policies such as expanding green ODA, financial contributions, use of carbon-free energy, and propose our leading initiative to proliferate carbon-free energy.
The President will pledge a leading role by Seoul in forming global principles and mechanisms for digital governance, including on technologies like AI. He will further map out South Korea's role as a non-permanent member of the Security Council for a two-year term beginning next year.
The top office says President Yoon will continue his push for greater cooperation on common challenges facing the world, in line with the UN General Assembly's theme this year, Restoring Global Trust and Solidarity. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News, New York.
And President Yoon actively seeks to promote partnerships with his counterparts on several fronts ahead of the United Nations gathering. One of those is asking for support for Korea's Busan so that it can host the World Expo in 2030. For more, here's our correspondent Kim Do-yeon.
The top office says President Yoon Suk-yeol, in the first 2 days of his visit to New York, met with 17 leaders through sideline summits, and there are still 20 more meetings to come. A repeated request from President Yoon for all the leaders he's met so far is for their support for Busan's bid to host World Expo 2030 during the Bureau International des Expositions in November.
President Yoon has been actively explaining that the Busan World Expo will be a versatile platform that provides the most competitive means of communication, promotion, and exchange.
The top office also emphasizes that the meetings are not just to promote Busan's bid. And as President Yoon Suk-yeol sits down with the leaders, he's also looking for opportunities to boost economic exchanges. The top office says for President Yoon, diplomacy equals economy. It says the bilateral sit-downs here in New York will lead to a bigger playing field for South Koreans to expand their businesses around the world. The near 40 countries that Yoon will have met during this trip make up 5% of the world's GDP, but they only take around 3% of South Korea's total exports. So there is room for growth in trade with these countries.
At this stage, although the absolute scale is not yet large, considering that our exports have not yet reached the market size of these countries, and recognizing that we are now at the starting point of growth, we can say that there is sufficient potential as a new market.
In addition, South Korea's trade with its top 10 partners make up more than 70% of its total trade. This leaves the country vulnerable to supply chain disruptions. So by working with these 40 countries, around a fifth of UN members, that South Korea can cooperate with through official development assistance, it can diversify its supply chains. The top office added that recently, with resources being a strategic asset, nations have started to nationalize their key resources. Establishing government-to-government relations with potential partners is important for South Korean companies to gain access to them as well. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News, New York.
On the first day of the general debate of the UN General Assembly, world leaders discussed the issue of the war in Ukraine, including President Zelensky, who's there for the first time in person since the war began. U.S. President Biden also calls on world leaders to stand up for Ukraine while also seeking to reform the council, as he's the only permanent Security Council member to address the chamber. Our foreign affairs correspondent Bae Eun-ji has this report.
As the war in Ukraine heads toward its second autumn, U.S. President Joe Biden called on world leaders to remain united in defending the war-torn country. In his speech to the United Nations General Assembly in New York on Tuesday local time, he warned leaders not to let Ukraine be carved up.
If you allow Ukraine to be carved up, is the independence of any nation secure? I'd respectfully suggest the answer is no. We have to stand up to this naked aggression today and deter other would-be aggressors tomorrow.
Biden also condemned North Korea's provocations, criticizing the regime for violating UN Security Council resolutions, while still leaving some room for diplomacy. Also at the event was Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who spoke at the UN General Assembly for the first time since the war began. He accused Russia of weaponizing everything from food and energy to abduct its children in its fight against Ukraine. He also drew attention to the tens of thousands of children who have reportedly been kidnapped by Russia.
But time goes by. What will happen with them? What will happen to them? Those children in Russia are taught to hate Ukraine, and all ties with their families are broken. And this is clearly a genocide.
Another issue discussed was over the United Nations' effectiveness, with Russia remaining a member of the UN Security Council. Speaking before world leaders, the UN chief warned that the world is inching ever closer to a great fracture and called for sweeping changes, including a reform of the Security Council.
Geopolitical tensions are rising, global challenges are mounting, and we seem incapable of coming together to respond.
His remarks come as only one leader from the permanent 5 members of the UN Security Council, the U.S. President, chose to attend this year's UN General Assembly. The Financial Times assessed that although the absences of the presidents of China and Russia were expected, the fact that the leaders of the UK and France missed this year's event suggests that the Security Council is no longer the premier place to address geopolitical issues. 배은지, Arirang News.
Russian President Vladimir Putin plans for a trip to Beijing next month for talks with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping. This comes on the heels of his talks with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un just last week. Yoon has more.
Following recent talks between North Korea's Kim Jong-un and Russia's Vladimir Putin, the Russian president is now set to meet with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping at the Third Belt and Road Forum in Beijing in October, as confirmed by the Secretary of Russia's Security Council Nikolai Patrushev on Tuesday. The two leaders are set to hold substantive talks for closer policy coordination to reshape a global governance system they say is unfairly dominated by the West.
In the context of the campaign launched by the collective West to double contain Russia and China, the further deepening of Russian-Chinese coordination and interaction in the international arena is of particular importance.
Even with the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, China has refrained from condemning Russia or calling the Kremlin's moves against its neighbor an invasion. China and Russia are currently working together on the formation of what Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi referred to as a multipolar world. Wang is currently in Moscow for security and foreign policy talks with Russian officials, and during a strategic security consultation, he said that both countries are committed to their own independent foreign policies.
Both China and Russia are committed to their own independent foreign policies. Our bilateral cooperation is not directed against anyone and is not subject to outside interference. The more violent the unilateral actions of hegemony become, it is even more important for us to keep up with the times, show a sense of duty as great powers, and further fulfill our international obligations.
China and Russia have grown closer as relations with the West have deteriorated for both countries. And the October meeting between Putin and Xi will have greater significance, considering it comes ahead of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Leaders meeting set for November in San Francisco. Ian-jin, Arirang News.
The foreign ministers of the Group of 7 nations held a meeting in New York on Tuesday and shared their concerns that cooperation between North Korea and Russia could lead to a violation of the relevant UN Security Council resolutions, adding that it could also undermine peace and security of the Indo-Pacific region and beyond. They called on UNSC members to follow through on their commitments. Russia is a permanent member of the UNSC. The G7 also denounced North Korea's continued expansion of its nuclear and ballistic missile programs and demanded that the regime abandons weapons of mass destruction in a complete, verifiable, and irreversible manner. The next meeting of foreign ministers will take place in Tokyo in November. The Asian Development Bank maintains its growth forecast for South Korea this year at 1.3%, slightly lower than that of the OECD. This while upping its forecast for the global economy on the back of stronger than expected recoveries in countries such as the US and Japan. Our Park Gon-woo has the details.
The Asian Development Bank has forecast that South Korea's economy will grow 1.3% this year, slightly lower than projections by other organizations, including the OECD. In a report released on Wednesday, the ADB kept South Korea's growth outlook unchanged from its July forecast, although the figure was down 0.2 percentage points from its first one made in April. The OECD's outlook released on Tuesday projected Korea's growth rate at 1.5%, which was also the same as its June projection. However, the growth rate has been continuously falling from the 2.7% registered in December 2021. Experts say China's slower than expected recovery and sluggish exports for South Korea are the major factors for the slowing growth rate. For next year, the ADB and OECD also both kept their outlooks unchanged from June's projections at 2.2% and 2.1% respectively. However, an expert, Professor Emeritus Shin Se-don, who was asked about the projections, did not expect a dramatic recovery in growth next year.
2024 will be a little better than 2023, but not much. I think in between 1% and 2%.
In terms of the global economy, the OECD predicted 3% growth for 2023, up 0.3 percentage points from its previous forecast, due to stronger than expected recoveries in countries such as the US and Japan. At the same time, however, the projection for next year was revised down to 2.7%. In the interview, Professor Shin projected an even worse situation.
Situation in 2024 won't be very much different from 2023. I think a little worse because of higher interest rate and increased uncertainty in the global context.
He concluded that if high interest rates remain in 2024, it will be difficult to see recoveries in global exports and economic growth. Park Ko-nu, Arirang News.
A conference on seeking business opportunities for global infrastructure cooperation is held in Seoul this week. There, South Korea agrees with Poland and Ukraine to work together not only on rebuilding Ukraine, but also on the European construction market. Our Lee Soo-jin tells us more.
Global infrastructure deals and Ukraine reconstruction efforts took center stage at this year's Global Infrastructure Cooperation Conference. This year marks the 11th GICC, a conference hosted by South Korea's Land Ministry to help domestic companies win overseas infrastructure deals through business forums, one-on-one business consultations, and seminars. And this year, it's bigger than ever, with ministers, CEOs, and high-ranking officials from 24 different countries in attendance. Land Minister Won Il-yong's Filipino counterpart, Secretary Manuel Banoan, said he came to the conference to show his appreciation to the South Korean government for its infrastructure work in his country.
Appreciative also of the assistance extended to the Philippines. The Bataan Interlink Bridge will definitely boost up the economic development of the country. And this will be the second longest bay bridge in the world, I guess.
Infrastructure projects in the Philippines have been garnering attention from private companies as they are valued at around $6 billion. The importance of South Korea's role in infrastructure projects was echoed by the chairman of Iraq's NIC.
Actually, the experience of Korean companies is worldwide. Our attendance here in the conference is to share the idea between these companies and maybe especially for the infrastructure of Iraq.
The conference also comes on the heels of Won's visit to Kyiv the previous week. This year, a special session was held to further discuss ways to cooperate on reconstruction projects in post-war Ukraine. During the session, an MOU was signed between South Korea, Poland, and Ukraine to work together on not only rebuilding Ukraine, but also on entering the European construction market. Won emphasized that Korea is the ideal country to assist in Ukraine's reconstruction.
South Korea is a country that achieved miraculous economic growth after being ravaged by war. We are sharing our war reconstruction experiences with Ukraine.
Ukraine's ambassador also emphasized that there will be many promising infrastructure opportunities.
And we invite Korean companies, Korean businesses to invest in Ukraine and win with us, win with Ukraine. Infrastructure sector will find many projects in the airports and the construction of new roads and bridges.
South Korea's public and private sectors will thus not only help rebuild a nation, but also continue participating in lucrative infrastructure deals across the world. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
U.S.-based energy firm Westinghouse says it will appeal the recent U.S. court decision that dismissed its lawsuit against two South Korean utility companies, possibly signaling a prolonged legal battle. The American firm had claimed intellectual property infringement for nuclear reactors. Our An Sung-jin takes a look at what could be a legal focus.
The American nuclear power firm Westinghouse Electric Co says it will appeal a court's decision to dismiss its lawsuit filed against two South Korean state-run companies Korea Hydro and Nuclear Power and Korea Electric Power Corporation for intellectual property infringement. The issue dates back to last October when Westinghouse first filed a lawsuit arguing that the two South Korean state-run companies are using one of their own licensed products, the APR 1400 nuclear reactor. It argued that under Part 10 of the U.S. Code of Federal Regulations, the South Korean firms would be required to have a U.S. government license. The KHNP argues that assistance from Westinghouse was only in the early stages of development, as the reactors were independently developed, and this separates them from U.S. export controls. The lawsuit was dismissed on Monday by the U.S. District Court of Columbia, citing a lack of standing on Westinghouse's part, as it has no legal grounding for action, though the question of intellectual property infringement still remains unclear. This decision would have hindered South Korea from exporting nuclear power plants to the Czech Republic and Poland.
That means when we go to a legal battle regarding the intellectual property, I think the license agreement made in 1997 will make a big role regarding the backup our capability to export our nuclear power plant to another country.
The expert suggests that the 10-year technology license agreement that was signed in 1987 with U.S. firm Combustion Engineering, which agreed to a full technology transfer to KEPCO, will play a role as it was extended for 10 more years in 1997. Certain marketing restrictions under the Westinghouse licensing arrangement have no expiration, blurring the lines of the license. However, talks between Korea and the U.S. will be vital as there is room left for dispute on the intellectual property infringement of nuclear reactor technology. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
To sports now and the upcoming Asian Games. The next batch of Team Korea athletes arrived in Hangzhou in China on Wednesday. They're heading to the city in stages according to the schedule of their respective events. Including officials, almost 100 members were on board the flight that left this afternoon, including the athletes who will compete in the tennis, shooting, hockey, and skateboarding events. South Korea is actually sending its largest ever delegation of 1,140 athletes to the Games to participate in 39 out of the total 40 events. After arriving at the competition venue, they'll participate in the official village welcoming ceremony on Thursday and the opening ceremony on Saturday. The Team Korea has set a goal of winning over 50 gold medals and achieving a top 3 overall ranking. Foreign travelers to Korea this coming Saturday or Sunday can receive a Korean name transportation card at Incheon International Airport. Seoul's Tourism Ministry will be handing out 500 public transportation cards featuring pure Korean words suitable for use as names. Korean words such as dasol, meaning young pine tree, are purely Hangul. This particular campaign marks the 2023 to 2024 Visit Korea year and seeks to promote Korean Language Week, which runs from October 4th to the 10th. Any foreign visitor is eligible for this card if he or she completes a survey at a kiosk located in the airport's tourist center.
Autumnal showers will keep soaking the nation until tomorrow. With the rain, overall conditions will get a touch breezier. The south coast will see torrential downpours of up to 150 millimeters. Chungcheongdo province and southern regions, including Jeollado and Gyeongsangdo provinces, will see up to 120. The capital region will see relatively less, with only about 10 to 60 millimeters. And depending on the movement of the rain clouds, some inland regions may see heavy downpours. At times, torrential downpours of 30 to 50 millimeters per hour may batter some regions. And for the south coast and Jeju Island, violent winds will follow at times. Make sure to secure any items that could get blown away. And rainy spells will be dominating for the morning hours. So we'll be starting off at 18 degrees Celsius. Showers will be ongoing for the south until the daytime. As for the daily highs, Seoul and Gwangju will peak at 25, Daejeon 24, Busan will reach 26 degrees. For this weekend, partly cloudy skies are expected for Seoul with readings near the seasonal average. That's all for now, and to the weather conditions around the world.
Well, that brings an end to this newscast. Thank you for watching. We'll be back with the special coverage on President Yoon's UN keynote speech in New York in the coming hours. Until then, goodbye.
한국에 오면 먹어야죠.